I'm going to stop it though. I hope that's all right. And if it's not, you feel free to turn your cameras off if you need to. And Colleen, it looks like you're going to make us some lunch or something. So great. No, okay, not. Well, good afternoon. Glad you're here. I am Kathy Douglas, Faith Formation Minister in the three regions in Southwestern Ontario. And we've got people from all three here. That's really great. So, Antler River Watershed, Horseshoe Falls, and Western Ontario Waterways. We're going to be talking quite a bit about stories and telling stories, and of course, that is a very big part of children's ministry. And so, in my land acknowledgement, I wanted to tell you a little bit of a story about my ancestors, our settlers that came from the British Isles, that came to this piece of land that pretty close to where I sit now, which is Stratford, Ontario. And they flourished here. They had farming and lots of rich rewards, and there's many of my ancestors still living here. It's called the Huron Tract, at least the Huron Tract Treaty Lands is one of the names of the treaties that have been signed in this area. And when I am aware of the winter time, I think about what land would have been like then. And what I've learned is that this area was marsh and bog. And from Hamilton from the water in Hamilton on a Lake Ontario and then up to Lake Huron, the track was formed and people would not have used it in the summer and probably not the spring either, but the fall and the winter was when they could travel, and that the people that were here before the settlers came were expert at winter travel and continue to be expert at it, and they have much to teach us and share us with us, which they did quite willingly to the folks that came from Europe and other lands. So in that bit of story, I'd like to acknowledge that the Adirondack people were one of the first group here, misnamed the Huron people, and the one that later they were called that, but mostly that was inaccurate. Those folks did not live here very long on this land. And I encourage you in your children and youth ministry or first third ministry, might call it, to share stories of a variety of things, including the Indigenous stories. Make sure that narrative is shared and heard from voices of Indigenous people or from a variety of folks who can share their stories with their own words in their own languages at times with the children and youth as much as possible. And if they can't physically be there, we can bring in their languages with technology, with books and pictures and images, just to make this a bigger and wider world. So there is what I'd like to offer as a land acknowledgement. Feel free, if it's good for you, to put something in the chat, add your land acknowledgement or treaty acknowledgement as you choose to do it, or in any way that you find helpful for yourself. The other part about children and youth ministry or any kind of ministry is to make sure people are feeling comfortable and at ease. So if you have any concerns or cares during this presentation or things that didn't go well for you or you're struggling with, I hope you'll reach out to me. You can send me a private chat message or later an email or call me. Having those inputs really changes how it makes our programming better. To hear what didn't work is just as important as what worked. So be sure to share anything with me as well. You can tell the good things too. We'd love, or the things that are working are great to hear as well. And to help folks feel at ease is to know what's going on. So I'm opening this and then I'll be thanking folks at the end, but then I'll introduce Louise and Louise will have a chance to introduce herself a bit more. But let me say that it's people like you that make these events happen. You bring me ideas, you bring struggles or celebrations that are happening, and then we can put an event or address those issues. So Louise, this was her brainchild to think of doing this event. So I'm so grateful, Louise. You've taken some leadership and you're taking part. And then you'll meet Allison as well. And Allison will introduce herself as our guest. And we're so pleased to have Allison here. She's an author, a storyteller, an educator. And we'll hear a bit more there. And then you're here, and we hope to share, you get to hear your voices too with each other. My role is to make sure things move along, so I'm going to try to do that and keep the time. That's the agenda. If anywhere along the line this isn't working for you, please take care of your needs. And, if you need to sign off or turn off your camera or whatever it is, please just do that. We are going to go into breakout rooms during Allison's time, so I just wanted you to know about that too. And I'm recording this, and I'm going to be creating a summary as well, that as long as I have your email, I'll send it to you and others who weren't able to come. Any quick questions or things that you need to share to make sure this is going to work for you? All right. Well, I'd like to invite Louise to begin with this with us.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. I'm Louise Morehouse, and I'm a member of White Oaks United in London, Ontario, and I'm one of the Sunday school teachers. We are a team of 3 who are all volunteers, and so we try to do things that are effective and simple and don't take a lot of time to prepare. I was in my former life an educator, and the people I work with have some experience as well, and we work well together as a team. Um, I have a long history in the United Church. Father, grandfathers, great grandfather, all ministers, and so a great interest in the Centennial of the United Church of Canada. So when I spoke to Kathy about the Centennial of the Church this year, my questions to her were, how can we celebrate our 100 years with the children and youth of our church, and what resources and ideas can we share? She pointed me to Allison's book, The Painted Trunk, and suggested we do a roundtable event. So here we are. And before Allison leads us through a storytelling experience, I want to share some of my thoughts and ideas and some of the things that we have already done at White Oaks. So at White Oaks United in the Sunday School, we are using Allison's book to frame our lessons for the centennial year. Although the book is out of print, you can still focus on themes Allison highlights in her stories. We are looking at the stories that tell the history of our church. So there are 3 that we're looking at: the stories of the formation of the United Church, the story about church camps, and the story about Sunday school in the past. There are also a number of outreach stories from the past, and some of them stretch into the present, like the story Out from the Cold. The stories in The Painted Trunk are told by a grandmother to her granddaughter and a friend. I will include a list of the stories that we're using at White Oaks with some of the activities in the materials that Kathy sends out to you after this event. The Centennial is a great opportunity to collect stories from your congregations. While there are still very few people alive from 1925, there are still story keepers. These people have stories from their parents and their grandparents that take us back to 1925 and before. Who in your church might have stories about church camps, CGIT, White Gift Sunday, Sunday school long ago, strawberry socials, box lunch socials, all of that. Maybe your Sunday school pupils can gather these stories, and this is also something that interests teens. At White Oaks United, Sunday school students interviewed parents, grandparents, and congregation members last year about their faith journey. The kids came up with the questions. They were interested in finding out about Sunday school, church camps, and vacation Bible school, as well as favorite Bible stories and hymns. We found out about Sunday school back in the 1980s and beyond. And one of our congregation members has a long history as a volunteer in United Church camps. So that person is coming on Camping Sunday to tell the kids about camping in the past. As well as stories, what about artifacts? Allison mentions in The Painted Trunk the book Songs for Little Children, which I happen to have a copy of, and somebody in your congregation might also have one. What about rounding up the old blue hymn book and the red hymn book that preceded Voices United? Perhaps grandparents and parents remember when the red hymn book came out. I certainly do. Did they have a favorite hymn in the book? What about family photos of church events? Or maybe your church has an archive collection of photos or church bulletins from important services in the past. What about old cookbooks that were church fundraisers? Everyone, young and old, could come up with a food story from church. Now, I have some of my mom's and grandmother's pins from the past. I'm wearing some of them on my jacket today, but I've also put a few on, on a cloth here. Not sure you can see them, but there's a pin of the United Church crest, and also I have an old pin of the old United Church crest with the blue background behind all of the symbols. I have a Women's Missionary Society pin, a Young People's pin, a CGIT pin, and I'm looking for that Women's Christian Temperance Union pin that was my grandmother's that I can't find yet. It's somewhere. Another thing that we've worked with is the United Church crest. And in Sunday school, we have focused on the crest several times. We have a crest with all the parts as separate pieces, and we hide them, and the kids have to find them and put them together, and they really enjoy that activity. And then, of course, we talk about all the different parts and what they mean. One time we made a large crest on laminated paper. During Sunday school, the kids prepared fruit of the colors on the crest and then put the fruit on the crest. We shared this with the congregation at coffee hour. It was a big hit, and it was even nutritious. The new creed is also a good way to talk about our beliefs. This is good for teenage students, but also for the younger ones. There are good resources online at the United Church website for both the creed and the crest. And in our church, one of the things that the confirmation class talked about was the United Church Creed. And it's a good opportunity to invite some of those teenagers to come and talk to the younger students about what the creed means to them. I know several churches, including ours, that are planning an outdoor worship service and a picnic around the time of the actual birth of the church in June. Others are planning box socials or strawberry socials, and it's a good chance to organize also some outdoor games for the kids, some of those old ones that include sack races, three-legged races, wheelbarrow races, egg on a spoon, relay races, and ring toss. I believe it's important to present some of the things that the kids are learning in Sunday school to the whole congregation in worship, and we try and keep it simple. After the interview project we did last year, we had 2 children interview a congregation member during worship. Each child asked one question. We also made a binder with the interviews, and it has a place in our sanctuary. And that one took a little bit of work, but we had somebody who was willing to do it, so that was great. This year, our students will participate in the June 8th worship service. And we will be asking the students what they would like to present to the congregation. This Centennial is also a chance to look to the future of our church. How do our children and teens imagine the church of tomorrow? What is important to them about church now? What values and spiritual traditions do they wish to carry forward? What changes do they foresee in their church? Have them talk about their thoughts, but also have them draw their thoughts. And this is interesting because I was talking to our nursery teacher the other day, and she is an ECE person. And at one of her ECE centers, they wanted to ask the children for solutions to a problem that existed on the playground. And she asked them verbally, and nobody came up with an answer. And then she asked them if they could draw a picture of a solution, and several of them immediately took pencil to paper and drew a solution. So I think it's important to give our kids a chance to express themselves in different ways because we never know what way is going to be the one that helps them imagine what their future or their thoughts might be. We could also ask the students to express their thoughts about the future of the church in movement, doing some drama or some dance, and also perhaps making some 3D shapes with their bodies or with objects. So I think that's about all I've got for the moment, and I'm looking forward to listening to what Allison is going to present.
So I should
I did
probably unmute myself.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say thank you, Louise. And I'm hoping that plethora of ideas might be inspiring you, and we hope to have a time that we can hear some more from each of you as well. So now I'm going to invite Allison to lead us.
Yeah, and by way of thinking, Louise, also, I'll tell you that some of our conversations, Kathy's and Louise's and mine, some of Louise's ideas have already made their way back to my congregation. So definitely we're building on each other's experiences in this. And shout out to Colleen, who once a long, long time ago was a student in one of my courses or two, and probably has heard some of what I'm about to say. So apologies if it's repetitive. So I wanted to begin with a story.
Oh, Allison, can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself too, where you live?
I
Oh, you
will.
are.
I
Sorry
will.
about that.
I will. It's okay. I know I'll say more, but I wanted to begin with a story that tells something about me. So, when the Christmas of my 6th year, I was given in England, my home at the time, a white ballpoint pen and a little spiral bound lined notepad. And the blue lines really intrigued me, but the spring around the edge of it also was quite fascinating to me. But the click of the pen when the nib popped in and out was just the most awesome thing. And there and then I decided I would write a story because I was going to be an author. I was going to write when I grew up. And so I began my story on the first page and I put in big block letters, my story, and underneath I printed my name also in big letters and I underlined everything. Then I wrote Once Upon a Time, flipped to the very back of the notebook and wrote The End, also in big block letters and also underlined. And then I started to fill in the pages. I don't actually know how far I got. But I know that my story had a beginning and it had an end and it had a sense of completion. Even if I didn't fill in all the pages, I remember being very pleased. So, by way of introduction, I love stories. I love the stories of the region where I am now, which is Ottawa Valley, where I've lived most of my life, and where I first encountered the United Church of Canada at age 10. So I'm going to tell you another story. About a week after my family's arrival in Queo, Quebec, in the Ottawa Valley, there was a church potluck. And I had heard there was going to be pancakes at this potluck, which to me was highly unusual because pancakes were breakfast food, but this was supper. So one kind of highly unusual thing was that the supper was going to have pancakes, but I was pleased and excited. And then we arrived and it was crowded and hot in the church basement and people were everywhere, none of whom I knew. And I was still shorter than most of the people in that place, but there were a few kids I recognized. The food, on the other hand, unrecognizable and horrifying. Pancakes, great, but they're supposed to be served with sugar and lemon juice, and they're supposed to be very thin. And these pancakes were fat. Then there were the sausages, also fat, but quite tasty. And Jell-O with grated carrot and green peas. Now that's mixing desserts with vegetables, which is wrong, very wrong. and all of it on big, heavy china plates from the church kitchen, served up with that sweet stuff that comes out of a jug and that everybody seems to love, and great slabs of butter. And I kind of pushed the jello with its green peas to one edge of the plate where it stood quivering a little in the heat of that crowded hall. So you can tell I'm new to the United Church, but not very new. And I've been part of the United Church all my life. And I have over the years collected a few stories out of that experience. But I've also come to learn quite a bit about stories and about how they work. And I'm sure that already today, many of you have already told several stories and certainly have heard several stories, because we live our lives by stories. We explain our world with stories. If I was to ask Colleen why she was a little late today I know you're clean, so I can do this, a little late today for our session, she'd probably tell me something of a short story about what happened and why and where she was and how that all unfolded. Stories explain. They make sense of our present. They are how we tell who we are to the world, as I just did. But they are also, as you already know, because you're thinking about the anniversary, they're also how we remember them. And the best stories, I want to say a little bit about that. The best stories, the stories of our biblical tradition and the stories that carry the traditions of our faith communities, are ones that carry a lot of meaning. So they're rich with meaning and value, and the Jesus stories, which we know quite well, probably most of us in our generation at least, are the stories that carry the meanings of our tradition. I did quite a bit of research and some work academically on how the stories of our faith and our own stories kind of come together to shape who we are as people of faith. I'm not going to talk about that, but that's a little bit of my working life. But I am going to tell you that stories really do three things. They remember the past, they explain and interpret and help us understand the present, and they imagine a future. Stories always carry with them an imaginative possibility. And I'm not going to talk for very long about this, but I'll really just say that one of the most important narrative theorists that I know is a woman named Maxine Greene, a philosopher. And she talks about how stories enlarge the spaces of possibility. Stories open our imagination. Think of the Jesus stories. They open our imaginations beyond what we can possibly tell in a non-narrative form of the love of God, of the complexities of human relationships, of the difficulties of life, of the struggles with the good and the evil. Those stories not only carry sense and meaning, they also help us make sense of our own lives and our lives of faith. But stories help us imagine and move beyond what is now into the possibilities of the future. I'm going to now give you just a few examples of some of the ways that we use stories with children. Certainly we tell children stories, and I'm sure you're all doing that. But we can also very intentionally and deliberately help children and young adults and youth and all the in-betweens and beyonds those age groups to tell stories that carry meaning and purpose. Not that we all have to be brilliant storytellers, but there are certain ways to shape a story to help kind of encapsulate its meaning and help it to be a story that others will listen to. And I'm sure you know that there are some people in your lives who probably tell a lot of stories that are mostly, some people do this, mostly anecdotal. They're kind of short little clips of anecdotes, or they're, my mother always used to tell stories of meals she ate. It used to drive me crazy. Why would you tell me about your meals? I want to know about your life. But she'd always tell me about her latest meals. But if stories really are going to capture and embody meaning, there are certain things we can do to help ourselves and others tell stories that carry weight. And one of the things we can do is do what storytellers and authors and others who work in creative fiction and other forms of non-literal writing do, which is to do what they call thick description. So this is an example actually from a book that's called Children Tell Stories. I'm going to share the information with you later, but it's an example of how you add thick description. And it's an example of a 10-year-old girl in a storytelling exercise. And the children in the exercise are asked to tell a one-line story. This is a fun thing we can do with people of all ages. Tell a story in one line. And her one-line story was, I fell into a fountain at a shopping mall. So it's one line. Then the group is asked what questions they have about the story. How old were you? Did it hurt? Did you get wet? How on earth did you fall into a fountain? And then her story becomes a beautiful little narrative about shopping with her mother when she was quite little and being given a penny. I guess there were pennies back in the day, and trying to toss it into the fountain and falling in. And then discovering that she was in fairly shallow water, so not afraid. And her mother, in the meantime, is busy talking to her friend. So she starts to collect up all the pennies and other coins that are in the fountain and put them into her pockets. At which point her mother turns around and, big dramatic scene, and she's removed from the fountain and the pennies are shaken out of her pockets. But in the telling of the story, you can see how I fell into a fountain in a shopping mall becomes quite a rich and beautiful story. And that little device of tell a one line something that happened, now let's shape it into a story, can be used in 100 different ways with all ages. Louise has mentioned using pictures. If children can't write, they can use pictures to create their story. And we can help the children practice telling the stories of their lives, which is vitally important because, as we all know, when we're sharing who we are in relation to the stories of our faith, we're always making that bridge, our story, this story, the collective community story. So I really encourage you to consider as many opportunities as you can in your work with children, youth, and young adults to invite the sharing of stories, to invite the creating of stories, and to invite thick description. Which is to say, if you ask people, what's a story of a time when you really enjoyed being in church? They might begin with, well, the day when such and such happened. But just flesh it out, tell the sensory detail. Not just what we see, but what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what's around us. What's the feel? What are you feeling? What's who's doing what in the outside exterior place? All of that context and detail not only makes the story more interesting, it also helps us touch on the heart of the meaning of the story. And just to go back to the little girl who falls into a fountain in the shopping mall, in that little encapsulated story, we see her relationship with her mother. That sense of I wasn't in danger, but knowing that in a way, if she's to examine the story in more detail, she's protected. She's in a place that's in some way people are watching out for her. She's disappointed. Her excitement at this great wealth of coins that is not hers is one of the discoveries of her life. That yes, you might end up in the golden fountain of riches, but it's actually not for you. So all of that little tiny narrative tells a lot about that young person's life, and we can explore those meanings in more detail. But I wanted to give you just one more example of this thick description. Did any of you see the sun come up this morning? Anybody up that early? It's getting harder to, well, no, it's getting easier, I guess, to Watch the sunrise. Is it getting later or earlier? Yeah, it's getting earlier. Right. So we have had an easier time of it. So I often watch the sunrise from my apartment window. But I don't often describe it this way. This is Mary Oliver. Every morning, the world is created. Under the orange sticks of the sun, the heaped up ashes of the night turn into leaves again and fasten themselves to the high branches. And the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies. It's not just the sun coming up. But when we play with story and with meaning, again, we're not all Mary Oliver, but we all have an incredible capacity for narrative and a much deeper capacity than we imagine for thick description, for that really going into the textures. The world created under the orange sticks of the sun. We can almost imagine it. I mean, I sometimes imagine it as a child's drawing, or the great colorful banners of paintings that we've seen. So invite children to tell stories, and we'll get some fabulous results. Invite and retell biblical stories. I'm sure you probably have done this, but telling a child a biblical story and then having them retell it to you can bring some extraordinary surprises, but also some depth of faith meaning. And let me just give you an example from my experience. I'm choosing one that's quite significant, but I'm sure you have your own. This was telling the story of Noah, which is a kind of uncomfortable story, and I was telling it with 4- and 5-year-olds, and it's a difficult story if we tell it close to its biblical origins. But when the children told it back, they, first of all, were very concerned about the animals, because what are all these animals that didn't get on the ark doing to survive? And so they added some other arks. There wasn't just one, there must have been others, because in their telling of the story and in their interpretation, God wouldn't let all the animals die. Now, you'll notice they were actually more concerned about the animals than the other people, but nonetheless, they were really aware that God of love doesn't cause harm. And so there must have been lots of arcs. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter that they are adding to and retelling and reinterpreting a biblical story. In fact, that's what's happened through the history of all of our biblical tradition for millennia, that people have added to the stories in order to add weight and meaning. And I think it's a really beautiful example of kids knowing and expressing their faith, a God of love, a God who cares, in the form of a story. And you, I think, could be quite surprised by, and maybe you've even seen some examples, invite children to retell a story to one another, and they don't necessarily parrot it. Some will get all the details right, but others will imagine it and create other possibilities, and they'll discuss and they'll argue about, what does it mean? But not necessarily saying this story means this, but more that their meanings will come through in the stories that they tell. What else to just say about this? Again, you've probably all done this. Tell a biblical story and pretend you're one of the people in the scene, and invite children to tell you their story of what they see in this scene, or invite adults or youth to do that. Retelling stories enlarges the meaning. It gives us new meanings. Again, it opens our imaginations. Am I doing for time here? We can give story prompts. In fact, it's much better to give a story prompt than to just ask a super general question about, some big abstract concept. Story prompts like the button prompt is a great way to get children started on, and particularly older children and young adults. You know the button prompt. Do you know this one, Kelly? Okay, the button prompt is you bring buttons from your sewing basket or your grandmother's or your mother's basket, and you bring a variety of buttons, and everybody chooses one. And then you try to imagine the person who wore or does wear the garment from which that button has been lost. Tell their story. Tell us who they are. And in doing so, now it may not sound like it has a lot to do with Sunday school, but little devices like that put us into a mode of storytelling help us build our narrative capacity, help us to practice being narrators and tellers of stories, which we all are. And then when you come to biblical characters or other stories that you want to go into a bit more deeply, again, particularly with youth, you've already practiced an exercise. So now you might give a little strip of cloth and the youth then tell the story of the character in the story that's wearing that color or that piece of fabric or that piece of tassel or ribbon. And the goal here is not to literally tell the story and what it means and what's the moral, but to enlarge the spaces. Okay, yeah, I have to quickly. Thank you, Kathy. Kathy has given me a note. All right, so now your task in groups of 3. Tell a story about what for you is an earlier experience of church. Now, you might be in the United Church for 2 years or 1 year, or you might have been here for 100 years or 20 or thousands of years like me. Tell a story about the United Church, your experience of the United Church. Tell something very specific and tell it with color and texture and people. Write down a few sentences of your story. And then when you're divided into small groups, each of you will tell your story to the other 2 people in your group. It's really safe. We're not going to record this part. Your story is safe in their hands. You can trust them. But practice a little bit of thick description with an earlier or an early experience of the United Church from your own experience. Is that clear? Kathy, can you put us into groups of 3?
Yes.
It'll do it randomly.
Yep. I will do that. I'm just going to make sure that, so you'll be asked to go into group and you'll accept that. So just to make sure they know what they're doing.
You're going to take 1 more minute to just write down some thoughts, a couple of sentences in your story. So maybe we can take that minute before we break.
Good idea. Yeah, take a few minutes to write down. I'm going to put it in the chat what you said.
So write a few sentences of your story using thick description, using detail. If you have to make up some imaginary things because you can't quite recall, that's just fine too. That's how story works. So write down a few sentences of your story. Tell your sentences to each other, and you're going to have about 5 minutes total. And thank each other for their story. That's all you have to do. No discussion, just tell your story and thank each other. So let's take our minute and then Kathy will put us into groups.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you 1 more minute there. All right, I'm gonna open those breakout rooms and I've written there. So offer your name and location if you don't mind. So you each meet each other. That's part of the purpose of these gatherings. Share your story. Each of you take a turn to do that and thank each other. And then if you're done, you can come back to the main room or you can keep chatting. Oh, Dawn, I'm gonna sign. I think that worked. Catherine, did you see?
We've got a couple of people who haven't joined.
Did it show you yours, Kathy? Sorry, I've asked you to unmute. You're muted. Are you able to unmute, Kathy? And Rohan, I don't know if you're. I put Kathy in a group, but we'll see.
Okay. Did the numbers work out? Do you want me to join a group or?
No, it's good you didn't go into one.
Okay. Because we could stay here if Kathy can't. Oh, she's getting help, I see. Hmm.
Do you see anywhere that it said it invited you to join a group, Kathy?
How's that?
I can hear you now. And did
There
you
you
see where, can Kathy join a group?
Yes, I'm supposed to be in room 4. What do I have to
Yes.
do to join that?
Just say yes.
go.
Oh,
No, like a mouse.
Great. Perfect.
I take for granted that people can do that easily, but it's
Yeah, I'm just now
okay.
checking for Rohan. He might have turned it on just to listen.
That's okay.
That one
That's okay.
one group has 4, and with Rohan, that's only 2 in one group. I don't know if I should add somebody. I could probably ask Colleen to change.
I don't think I'd worry. We could just
Okay.
leave them now because they probably already started.
Okay.
Hmm.
Thank you. So very rich.
Good. That's helpful. Lots more I could have said as you
Oh gosh.
just
In fact,
blabbering on.
I think we could do another one and name it storytelling. Like how do you,
Yeah, I mean that's in some ways that's what this is.
yeah.
But I'll check on the painted trunk and see if I can track down how to get permission for that. It shouldn't be hard.
Well, if you do, I can do a bit more work too. I'm gonna put.
I don't know who would be.
Well, there's a person that's at UCR the Resource Center. There's a staff person that I've spoken to before there.
It's more the publishing end though that we'd need to.
Oh, good. Rohan went in the room. Yay.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's still functioning. Yeah, it wouldn't be the resource center. I don't think they would know.
Okay.
What I'll do is I'll actually look at the office structure. Hmm.
I like that thick description a lot. Yeah.
This is a very much outward facing, oh, copyright. Okay. Yeah, there's a phone number. Do you want it or do you want me to do it?
It's up to you. I'll do if like you don't need to do work you don't want to do, but I'm
Okay, let me just put it in the chat because because I think probably an email. No, I've copied way too much. Um, I've copied the whole page. Let's start again. Ignore that, sorry. Um, yeah, there was a phone number, but also an email. Um, so it gives the general number. It's not going to help. Okay, the email is copyright at United Church CA for an email address. So copyright at united-church.ca.
okay. I'll look it up.
And I think if you just emailed them at that address, they would be able to say yes or no. You could explain the circumstances. Unless you think it would be better coming from me.
Well, I'll see what they say. If they say,
Yeah, so it's
well,
that email address. I just put it in. I
excellent.
think I just put it in.
Great. Yep, I got that. So, Allison, when they come back, did you have a sense of how you'd want to have them return, or can we go into the round table where they share?
Let me give one sentence about what would be next.
Okay,
Rather than having them, explain what happened. And
sure.
probably they should have been able to do it by now, I would think. So
I
we could
timed
check
it.
in.
I timed it for 15 minutes, so it was 5 minutes
Okay.
each, and I said to come back when they were
Oh,
done.
no, I was going to give them 5 minutes total. You give them 5 minutes each? Okay. All
I
right.
gave them each. I can shorten it. I can send them a message and say, like right
Yeah.
now they're in there for another 7 minutes.
Okay, well, let's just leave it then. No, I intended it to be just total 5 minutes of them sharing because they're only writing 2 sentences, but they may have written more. So that's okay.
I bet they're chatting. I said,
I bet they
I
are
can
too.
broadcast to them and say,
Come
I'll just,
back if you're done.
yeah.
If you're just chatting by now, come back if you're done. Yeah, it gives them a chance to meet each other anyway, which I know is part of your goal, so that's fine. Great thing about Zoom is we can make them come back.
Broadcasted that. I don't know. I want to, yeah, I'll let you do a little bit of an unpack there with it, and then we'll go into sort of the round table where I'll have
Great.
share and
And
tell them
you're
about all the Centennial, where they can put their stories and where they can get information and stuff like that.
great.
Yeah, it worked out really well. I got everybody in group. One group has 4.
It's okay.
Yeah. Oh no, one group only has 2. Rowan
Oh,
left. Rowan left. He's brand
oh
new
well.
to the United Church. He just became he just was covenanted as the minister in the Goddard United Church.
What's his name?
Rohan, and I cannot pronounce his last name just yet.
I
And
think I
he's
have met
from
him.
India. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
So
Mary Beth and Golda, you had only two. Rohan didn't make it into your group. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Debated about jumping in myself, but I didn't write down a story.
No, I didn't have a story either. Um, I grew up a Roman Catholic, so we never had Sunday school.
Ah,
Yeah, we just went to church.
well, that's a story.
That's what Golda said. That is my story.
Mm.
Neat. And Mary Beth, you're in Niagara area, are you not?
Oakville.
Thank
Mhm.
you. Okay.
Actually, Kate used to be our minister. I see Kate Young is on. She was our minister.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's good.
Mhm. Mhm.
Excellent. You have quite a few churches in Oakville, actually.
I know. Yeah, we're meeting to see what we can do about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them are smaller than others. Is that?
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
Mhm.
So that broadcast thing worked. You could see my message.
Yes, I could.
Good,
Yeah.
good. I was explaining that Rohan, and this will, uh, because Gold is in the same regional council.
Right.
Rohan is new to Western Ontario Waterways. He's the new minister at Lakeshore in Godrich.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And I just saw him on the weekend. The moderator was in Stratford, and I told him about this, and he said, "I'll try to come."
Um,
So I think he probably,
Goderich, that's quite far up
Lake Huron.
in the Huron
Yeah.
area. Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Allison and I were saying that a workshop on storytelling would probably be a really good workshop.
I could use that for sure.
We
Mm.
weren't
Yeah.
stories. This is morphed into that around the Centennial because we started the
Mhm.
painted trunk and things, but we also
Oh, pardon me, I have to just go out for a little bit. Is that
sure, oh, no
okay?
problem. Yeah,
Just
I'll mute you. Oh, she completely went out. Golda, are you a United Church lifer? Can't remember.
Yep. We've always gone to the United Church. My mom was raised Presbyterian, but switched to United when they got married. And we grew up in a small country church, and everybody had their own spot they routinely sat. So each family was in their same spot each week. And so you could almost look around and take a and people did. They looked around and they saw who was there and who wasn't there, and then the gossip would start as to why they weren't in church. And no matter what we were doing on a Saturday night, whether we were out working, babysitting, or out partying or whatever, you always were in church Sunday morning.
Mm.
There was no excuse not to be in church Sunday morning.
We had a funny experience in our church. I think most people sit in the same spots every Sunday or tend to. And we actually shared worship with the congregation that uses the space at a different time, a different congregation. And so we're all in church figuring out who sits in what pews because everybody has their own pews. It's quite funny watching people like, they're in my pew, but that's their pew when they're here.
Well, it's hard when new people come to the church too. They sit in somebody else's pew, and that's not always looked upon
Yes.
favorably. Yeah, Colleen. Like, oh my God.
Hey, welcome back. Hello, Young Suk. Good to
Hello,
see you.
Kathy. How are you?
I'm good. Very good. So welcome back. I'm going to let Allison finish this section off, and then we'll move into a sharing more around particularly centennial celebrations and things they're doing.
Mhm.
And
Just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that the next element of this kind of an activity would be to try and pull out some common themes and to look at, were there themes in common in your small groups? What did they tell you about your experiences of church? And then we could create a kind of composite map in our imaginations of this is the fabric of the United Church as we've experienced it. Just to say one more thing, though, when I was writing The Painted Trunk, which I know some of you are hoping to use to tell stories, and the same could apply if you collect stories, I took the stories they're all based on a real event, a real story, but I fictionalized many of them, well, in fact, all of them, in the sense of I narrated them as an imaginative story. So I added in context and texture and details. So a story about people in Eastern Canada during the Great Depression sharing dried fish with the prairies, and the prairie folk not necessarily knowing what to do with the salted cod and how not to eat it, salt and all. That story exists in the repertoire and archives of the United Church, but I created a character, and I created a character who had actually experienced that and who could tell that story first person. We can do that with all the stories we collect about our history, and it adds a way of, it makes the story compelling and memorable when we do that. And when we do it with our own stories in a workshopped kind of format, we are, again, deepening the meaning by adding the sensory detail, that the story in its bare, tiniest form is not the story that lives and breathes and carries imagination. And Jesus knew this in the telling of stories. So I'm going to close there with that, just that little piece of commentary on what we've just done. And I hope you had fun hearing each other's stories.
thank you so much, Allison. We were chatting that when Louise and I talked about asking Allison to be part of this, we didn't know this would go to such a storytelling experience. So we think we need to do another event around storytelling, as well as the centennial celebrations. But I know many of you, the way that this was promoted was also to talk about particular centennial things you're doing or how you would like to be doing things. So I'm going to send you some links about where you can find ideas, where you can share your ideas with the United Church of Canada, where you can get money to do some of your ideas. Um, and and then also there's a link to show you at least Allison's book, the cover of her book, but we're searching to see whether we can get copyright. You can't find her book anymore. It's not being
No.
published. But if you ask around, you might find one in a lot of shelves in church work. And we're going to see if we can maybe get it available for folks. So I just
Good.
wanted to
Lovely.
so, and Louise, this is your time. Remember, though, there's a lot of us, so we want to share. This is a round table. So, things you're doing, things you're struggling with, why you came on this call, anything that you want to share with your colleagues here in this round table, opening it up. And it's always nice to say your name and where you're from so people get to know each other. Nobody?
I can take a start at it. My name's Colleen, pronouns she and her, and I am at Dublin Street United in Guelph, where I serve as the youth and young adult minister, and my young adults are as old as 49. So, we're stretching that definition. And our 20, 30, 40 something group will be holding, we've started doing this. We did one back in November. We were going to do one in February, but we'll be doing it in March. We're doing intergenerational dances. So like think about, a school dance or similar. Same vibes. We have chocolate bars and chips and pop for sale and glow sticks for sale. We decorate our gym. It's a really fun time. And yes, Bruce is one of my colleagues. And for June, we're gonna do 100 years of music as our theme for our June dance. Um, and I'm super excited about it. We're gonna have to dig up 100 years. We're gonna find on Spotify um, music that goes back 100 years, hopefully. And we have had a really great time with it so far. We've had our youngest person that has come to the dance was 3 months old. Our oldest person that has come to the dance was in her mid 90s. And we all dance together. And it's absolutely a blast. We had about 40 people out for the one in November. We think we probably would have had around the same or more in February, but there was that giant snowstorm situation. So we're having one on March 15th. We're going to do St. Patrick's Day. I haven't come up with how to musically theme that one, except that we will play Good Luck Babe by Chapel Roan. That's the only one we know that we're doing.
Hmm.
Thanks,
But it's been
Chloe.
great. And I'm looking forward to 100 years of music.
Thank you. You're also welcome to ask each other questions too.
Colleen, that sounds a bit like something we have planned. It's not like for kids, but it's just for everyone at the church. We're calling it a tea and tunes. So we're doing, yeah, like tea, like sandwiches, as the United Church does a good sandwich spread. And yeah, tunes, like sing along to hymns and tunes from the last 100 years. So other than that, yeah, I haven't really figured out yet how do I get the kids a bit more involved in these celebrations. So, other than that, one big idea, I don't know, was just here for some more inspiration.
Thanks, Victoria. I might have missed it when Louise was speaking, but I don't know if she said it. Louise, you talked about painting a trunk or doing a painted trunk that was going to be in the space that had these artifacts or all these things that you're collecting in it that the kids can pull out and ask about. Maybe, do you want to?
Sure, because I forgot to mention that when I was talking about using the painted trunk, and that's what we've already done two of the stories from the painted trunk. And then one of the teachers is great at crafts, so she's taken a wooden box and covered it so that it looks much like the painted trunk in Allison's book, which has got pictures of Bible stories all over it. And then in the trunk each week that we do Sunday school are clues about the story that we're going to be talking about. So this week we did the story of Out of the Cold, which is about the United Church and their outreach to people that are homeless. And so in the box there were a tiny pair of mittens. And then we had some other clues that weren't in the box, but that was the one in the box. And each week we've done that. And the one we did 2 weeks ago, the first one was a story of the um, beginning of the United Church. And so we had in the box, we had the United Church crest, and what else did we had? A couple of other little mementos about the beginning of the church for the kids to take out and try and guess what the story was about. So, and that's all. The kids love that. That's really a good way to start Sunday school. And our minister is great with puppets, so we've been doing a detective theme even before the 100th anniversary. So we have a detective puppet that she uses every Sunday for story time. And the detective also has a clue about the story that we're going to be talking about. It's great fun. So, yeah.
Thanks.
I was fortunate to be at the commissioner at the 75th General Council, and there was a gentleman there who wrote a play. His name was Scott Douglas, and he wrote a play called Maybe One. And I see that you're smiling, Allison. Yes. And so I had asked him then for that play, and I have a copy of it, and I've sort of, put it together in two other churches. but I was in contact with him last year and found out that he'd updated it. And so I now have a copy of that. And our congregation is going to put on that play in April. And I'm really thrilled about it because it's the story beginning right back in Mutual Street Arena, right up till almost today. And I'll go through all the various things that the United Church has worked on. And I'm thrilled that several of the teenagers came forward to take parts in it. I don't have any younger children, and I don't think they'd understand it anyway. I think it might be a little difficult for them, but I do have a lot of teenagers that are involved in it, and they have learned so much about their church, and it's given them um it's made them more interested because they know all of the issues that we have dealt with over 100 years, and they're now bringing some of their friends, so that's been a real plus.
I'm really conscious of, it's so cool to talk about the past, and when people have a past in the United Church, it's very interesting. One of our people here, she had to leave. But she said, and maybe I can't tell her story, but she did say, I don't have a United Church story to tell about being a kid in the church or my family being, and so I think that's a story too. How do we tell stories of newcomers to the United Church? And
Hmm.
where do we make space for those stories? So that's, or painful stories. Sometimes some of our stories are painful too, which would be really an interesting part to consider too.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there because when we were interviewing the parents and grandparents of the kids in Sunday school, it was really interesting because a lot of them came up, did not grow up in the United Church. They were Catholic or Baptist or Anabaptist. And so we got all these other stories about other traditions that were really fun and interesting
Mm.
to hear about.
Any inspirations or thoughts or questions you might want to share with your colleagues?
I'm thinking a little bit about accessibility and storytelling. I know that the drawing was a really good option that was offered. Just thinking about my particular group of small children with that have among them almost the whole group is either very young or um, developmentally, very young. The literacy is level overall is very low.
Mm.
And so the ability to put words together or use really creative descriptions would be really challenging. But I still love this concept of being able to tell your story and find a way to share that and just trying to think about creative ways to do that in a diverse group of young learners. And especially, wee ones. My youngest is 4. Um, and my highest literacy level is maybe
Mm.
grade 2, despite the age being higher. So, yeah, because I love the story and they love to hear stories, although sitting still is a challenge.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, finding ways to tell those stories and articulate them
Mm.
and express them for those kids is, and maybe that's where movement and dance is a good option. For that group more than it might be for some others. But yeah, just trying to think about creative avenues for getting into storytelling when stories have, in a lot of traditional ways, relied on, yeah, words and vocabulary and some of those pieces.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, as we've said, this kind of a gathering is for you to connect with each other. And so I hope I can be a conduit for that. If you're somebody you want to ask a little bit more about, or you'd like to gather in a smaller group to unpack some more ideas, that's really a great idea. Um, I do need to make sure I have all your emails, and I'm pretty sure I do with this gang, but do let me know and send any more ideas you have. And again, if this wasn't what you thought it was going to be and you're still looking for what you thought it was going to be, please let me know that too. One more quick check. Was there anything else anybody wanted to mention? Allison's going to lead us in a little bit. That's another piece of this is a time for us to just have a bit of a holy, quiet moment or a reflective moment on the topic or for us to share together as well. So we're going to close that way. And then you're just welcome to click off or stay on if you want to keep talking. And but it's checking again. Is there anything else anybody wanted to say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
Ella.
I want to jump in and have, after that conversation about, how do you work with stories with children that have limited vocabulary and all of that good stuff, because you are doing this wonderful session on neurodivergent kids
Yeah.
in March. And I just
Mhm.
thought maybe you could give a plug for that because I'm really excited to attend that one.
I'll
It
be
is on my calendar.
It has been quite important, not just with kids, neurodivergency across all ages
Hmm.
and capacities. So we do have, I'll send it to all of you, I send you an email, and Colleen, I got the right email now. I'll send you
I
the
want to be on
link.
that too.
Okay, Allison. Um, and
Mm.
it's with Tiffany Jewell, who is she works for the Waterloo Board of Education, and her work is with kids with neurodivergency and the teachers and everybody. But she was in you know her, I think, Kelly. She told me she knew you from the Maritimes. She grew up in the Maritimes. She's done church in the Maritimes. Now she's doing church in Ayr, Ontario, a Sunday school teacher. So really rich experience, and she'll share what she's learned and how she can help. Thanks. You're a great promoter, Louise. Thank you very much. To close then, do what you need, folks, and Allison's going to offer us a little bit of a reflection.
This has been really a rich conversation, and I love how one idea sparks another and how creativity expands on itself. And I also just wanted to, in closing, say thank you for the work you're doing because it's so vital to the present of our church, not just to the future of our church. So for a closing, let's take a breath. The closing would be like this. We'll take a breath. We'll just sit in a moment of silence and let ourselves digest what has been and what we've shared together. And then I'm going to just simply invite each of you to share a word, a single word or two words, like not a great long sentence, but just a word of something that comes to mind that reflects what you might be taking away from this experience. And then I'll close that. So we'll take a minute, then I'll invite you to share a word, and then I'll just close with a very short blessing. So